But in the same time, today you believe that humans were able to reach to the moon and to have like missiles in space and discovering new galaxies all around us. So today we have very advanced human knowledge, and still at the beginning, why don't you think that humans were able to do things like that, like making a huge building 4,500 years ago? It's just as simple as that. Humans are able to do anything just by learning and time.
Mohammed Aly, thank you for joining me on the AUXORO Podcast.
Thanks, Zach. I'm happy to be with you today.
Yes, I'm so excited. I almost just forgot the name of my own podcast.
It's AUXORO.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. I'm reading it. I'm reading it right now. That is the only way I can remember. So we actually met. We should tell people before we get into it. We actually met about a month ago when I was traveling through Egypt with my girlfriend, and we went on this fabulous tour, the absolutely fantastic tour that you gave us of ancient Egypt, where we went through the pyramids, we went through tombs, we rode a couple camels, like some camel cowboys, and it was a spectacular tour. And my question to you, the thing I wanted to get into, is what drew you to Egyptology? Because it's a pretty rare thing to want to study your own country's background. Like I live in America, and the amount of people that are actually knowledgeable about American history is less than 1%. And I put myself into that category. I'm not an American historian by any means. So for you, what drew you to Egyptology and the study of your country's ancient past?
I have actually grown up south of Egypt, like near Luxor today, around 200 kilometers. My village has like thousands of ancient tombs. We have one of the most beautiful temples as well around us. So since I used to be a student in primary school, we used to go on school tours to those places. That actually made me very interested how amazing the ancient Egyptian art is and how beautiful paintings upon the walls. So since that date, actually, I wanted to study history, and I was very interested in history. And later, when I started to grow up and started to travel around Egypt, I have met with English family, and they were passionate about Egypt history. They encouraged me very much to study Egyptology and to be actually my future career.
Are you using headphones, by the way? It just sounds like there's some background noise, but if you are using the headphones, then that's okay.
Yeah, I'm using headphones.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so your family your family exposed you to Egyptian culture early on. You were around those types of things.
Yeah, actually living in very old village. My village is like 5,000 years old, so that makes you very interested to know what exactly around you. And when you start to grow up like that, then my eldest brothers started to work in tourism field, contacting tourists. That actually made it for me like a future plan when I was a student, just to follow this way, just to study Egyptology and the Egyptian history, and to talk about the great history of ancient Egypt to foreigners from other countries.
And I was one of those foreigners, and I'm grateful for it. And it's fascinating to me that you grew up in a town that was 5,000 years old, because I can't even conceive of that. I grew up in a town called Plainview, Long Island in New York. And, that's maybe a few hundred years old, and was founded when the British came over to America and colonized the East Coast. And so everything that I'm seeing around me has a date of 200 years, 300, like a few centuries. I couldn't imagine growing up in a place that had literally thousands of years of history, that the things that you're seeing, the things that you're looking at have so much history behind them, and a lot of it is lost, and a lot of it it may be difficult to understand, but getting into that history, I imagine it made you want to learn more about it, being in that place and being surrounded by all these things that by most people's standards are old as fuck.
The Egyptian civilization, actually, it's very different from others. And when we talk about something old like ancient Egypt and very perfect, actually, that's kind of crazy when you look at how accurate things around you. That makes you really very interested to get to know what exactly behind the scenes, how they were able to do all of that, and are we really connected to them? Like, are they our grand ancestors or not? This actually made me very interested, especially in high school when I started to grow up and to understand more about the Egyptian history. That made me like I have just one target, and I was just following university courses and subjects about Egyptology even before joining the university. So it was just like a dream to me to be Egyptologist like 12 years ago.
What was the first thing that you remember finding out about ancient Egypt where you were like, holy shit, this can't be true? Like something that just blew your mind about the history of Egypt that maybe you weren't even taught it in school. It was something you learned when you started pursuing your own self-education.
Many places in Egypt actually still make me very amazed, and I don't really believe that humans were able to do that. However, I don't believe in aliens, but
and by the way, a lot of people don't believe humans did it. There are a lot of conspiracies out there where people are saying that aliens came down 5,000 years ago and helped Egyptians and other ancient societies learn how to build and gave them all this technology. And somehow none of that high technology, none of that, all the like the electrical sockets and all these alien things somehow are not found on Earth, but people still believe that. I've seen that thrown around a bunch of times, that humans are kind of experiments and aliens came to our planet to mess with us and give us technology and kind of just babysit us and poke us in the right direction.
Yeah, many of my tourists from all around the world, especially American and Canadian, still believe in aliens, theories of Egyptian civilization. But I don't mean that actually. We have many places in Egypt still beyond your mind to understand how they were able to do that. For example, Saqqara, and this is a place that I don't really do in every tour. It needs a bit much more harder effort and much more specialized people to visit. The Serabium of Saqqara, it's underground tunnel and contains very heavy sarcophagi, like 100 tons each. For me, till today, I don't understand how ancient Egyptians were able to do that, like moving a single block of 100 tons in underground tunnel and carving them with very accurate shape at the end. And we have found them empty, so we don't know exactly what happened, why they did that, and for which purpose really they used the sarcophagus of the Serabium. But still, maybe even modern technology and engineering trying to understand that, following the scientific way, of course, not the aliens stories. And they can't really get maybe conclusive answer of this Serabium of Saqqara, the unfinished obelisk in Aswan. Many places all around Egypt makes you very amazed when you visit, not just Giza pyramids, of course. And you don't know how humans were able to do that. I believe faith, and they were very well organized, following scientific and mathematical ways that could help them with that. But of course, that's not enough when it comes to my own understanding of Egyptian history.
Yeah. What do you say to the tourists who are just convinced that it's aliens somehow, that they're convinced that the ancient Egyptians got some help in the form of beings that beamed down to Earth and gave them some sort of technology? What do you say? What do you say to those people who are just absolutely stuck on that? Like there's nothing you can tell them to convince them otherwise.
I believe actually in our Egyptian history, and evidence and the confirmed facts. So, for example, people are taking pyramids or Giza pyramids in particular to be built by aliens. So just to make it simple for my tourists, we start from the south of Giza pyramids. We do it like a timeline from Saqqara and Dahshur and other places, so they can understand how they developed engineering, and they failed like twice. They kept trying for 100 years, failing and trying again, changing their measurements, developing knowledge, and in the same time, while developing their own engineering knowledge, they were also developing their own religion. They were like following on a straight line together. That led us at the end to Giza pyramids. So actually it takes a bit harder effort to convince people who believe in aliens, but most of them believes at the end when it comes to showing them the older structures. The pyramids took 150 years to be developed from simple, smaller size step pyramid into the huge Giza Great Pyramid, and then declined again because of economy collapse in ancient Egypt. So all signs showing you it's just a human-made. It's just like the same stages of development of any civilization. Starting weak, getting stronger, reaching the peak or the top of power, and then starting to collapse by time. If it was alien-made, they may needed to add some more other buildings all around Egypt. They may needed to lift anything to confirm they were here, they existed here in Egypt, or they visited Egypt. At least we need to have one mummy of an alien got killed while building the pyramid, or died, or something happened to him or to her. We don't know exactly about the gender of aliens, but we have nothing confirms that at all. They left us nothing, and the world for thousands of years trying to contact them, and they received no connection back. So it's just crazy to believe in those things.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, you would think because there's so many collapsed pyramids also, that there are a lot of pyramids that are well preserved, but there's also a lot of structures that are in ruins. And you would think that if the aliens were sharing technology with the ancient Egyptians, why would they stop all the way? Why would they stop at preservation if they're going to share everything with them, all their technological secrets? Why would they stop at, okay, we're going to teach you how to do everything, but we're not going to teach you how to preserve it. So all this shit is going to collapse in thousands of years. You would think that aliens would have some sort of self-preservation or mechanical preservation technology to keep things around for longer, keep things around in better condition. And also, if someone is essentially a god to you, which is what someone would be if they brought down all this technology, you would want to elevate that person. And they elevated people in the form of building tombs for pharaohs. And there was a very, very strong connection between the death and the afterlife, which you were also explaining to us. So I agree. It doesn't make sense that there would be no kind of like alien artifacts or an alien tomb, mummification, something that just doesn't make sense in the form of a mummification like what they did for humans, just like something that would point to it.
Yeah, actually, and it's very clear that if they were aliens, why they don't leave anything else all around the world, just Giza pyramids, and they stopped. Like they came here for 50 or 60 years to build the two great pyramids of Giza, and then suddenly a smaller one, the third pyramid of King Menkaura, and nothing else. So it's just crazy. 50 years of human-made structures just to glorify their own pharaohs. They were worshipped as gods actually during that time, and they needed to have respectful great buildings to keep their own memory, connecting them to the sun god. And that's why actually same as any other human effort, after reaching the top or the peak of anything, it starts to collapse by time. That's why we have 100 smaller size pyramids scattered around Giza pyramids to the north and to the south. So it's actually explaining to you that they were just trying to do something, but this huge thing exhausted the Egyptian economy in ancient times. So they just started to draft towards something else. Instead of having those huge structures, they started to believe more in prayers, and they started to make written prayers inside the pyramids to replace the huge size of each building. And this is actually human-made, because pyramids of Saqqara and Abu Sir and even Fayoum pyramids mentioned in ancient hieroglyphics as tombs. It's written during that time, like 4,000 years ago, the pyramids were tombs. It's just people taking these pyramids like selection, taking 3 pyramids out of 118 to connect them to aliens. But the others are pyramids too, following the same structure design, just the size is different, the material is different, the time is different, but it's the same, it's a pyramid. So why you just select those to say they were built by aliens for different purposes? However, all other pyramids mentioned as tombs by ancient Egyptians.
Yeah, and I'm biased because I believe in the existence of other forms of life, because it would be absolutely exhilarating to realize that there's other people out there besides you, and also because I want to record a podcast with an alien before I die. You know, maybe I did already. Maybe, you know, someone hasn't been as forthcoming as they seemed on the podcast and they were actually from another planet. But imagine if you are a space traveling species that can travel in ways that we can't even imagine. They can go through galaxies, wormholes. They are going into hypersleep, all these things that you see in the movies. And then you get to Earth, and the thing that you do is just build a large triangle, like just stack stones on top of each other. You would think that there would be a more advanced form of something when you get to another planet. Like if I got to another planet and I had all this technology with me, and there were people that were still building things with stones, I would probably just create my own section of the planet and form my own civilization, or hang out, whatever, you know, have record podcasts on the beach or the equivalent to a beach somewhere else, and just, you know, hang back. It doesn't make a lot of sense that the pyramids would be this isolated alien technology like people say it is. But again, who knows? I'm just an unexpert, you know, kind of armchair historian. So maybe we'll find something out in the future.
Yeah, that's why actually when we study Egyptian history, we say the Egyptian civilization history till today is a history of maybe. So we are not really sure of all facts that we study and we learn to people, because we still just following the scientific way. So every day we get more updates related to the Egyptian history, and those updates actually proving us that everything existed, not just in Egypt, mostly all around the world, just human-made. And those other aliens or lives or civilization on space, if they existed, they will be millions of years away from us. So it will be like impossible actually to have any direct connection with them, even using phones. So it's just no way to have any evidence, even in the future, relating anything related to human effort on Earth to aliens. And this actually very, very hard for me to see people are just don't believe in human power and don't believe that humans are able to do something like that. But in the same time, today, you believe that humans were able to reach to the moon and to have missiles in space and discovering new galaxies all around us. So today we have very advanced human knowledge, and still at the beginning, why don't you think that humans were able to do things like that, like making a huge building 4,500 years ago? It's just as simple as that. Humans are able to do anything just by learning and time.
Yeah, that's an insightful way to look at it. In a way, every time you ascribe an achievement to beings from another planet because you don't understand how it got there or how it was built, you are also discounting the power of human beings to come together and form communities. Because one thing that I've realized in my short 28 years of life on this planet is that when you are alone, a lot of things seem impossible that people do in groups. And when you get groups of people together, hundreds and thousands like the ancient Egyptians did, and you have one common goal and you have one common belief, and you literally feel like the gods are on your side. Almost anything is possible to do, in my opinion. And maybe we don't understand exactly how the pyramids were built because it is crazy. I remember you were talking about how the Great Pyramid is the most accurately aligned building in the world in terms of north, south, east, and west being aligned with the cardinal directions. And there were also 70, 80-ton stones that were hauled up. And according to my understanding, even Egyptologists and archaeologists still aren't exactly sure, or there is no consensus on how these massive stones were hauled up to these great heights. So it's fascinating to think about, but it's a lot of times people can be quick to discount human achievement and the power of humans.
It's maybe it's maybe because of, I don't want to say that, but it's lack of knowledge. Maybe like you don't know anything about Egypt, for example, and when you come and you see such huge structures, so what comes to your mind for the first time is just it's not a human made, but you need at least to know how Egyptians were here for like 100,000 years or more before building the pyramid, and they started to develop unity and working together. They started even to develop their own religious beliefs that at the end led them to having such huge structures. And still just taking one great pyramid of Giza because of its accurate structure as an example of greatness can't be a human effort. It's very unfair actually, because you still need to visit Valley of the Kings in Luxor. It's rock cut tombs, some of them like 200 or 300 meters and hard stone of the Valley of the Kings, and they were able to do that 1,500 years after building the pyramids, trying to cut the obelisk in Aswan, 1,200 ton single block of granite. That also can't be a human made when you take it as a first look. However, when you look carefully, you'll see the human hands remains and how they were following just simple tools to cut such very huge blocks of stone with their own hands, to use them for construction for their own great pharaohs, which were greatly glorified like gods in ancient Egypt. So actually, just you need to have a maybe much wider view of things in Egypt, not just Egypt, by the way, even for the surrounding civilizations like Greece and Iraq, because they have also great things around us. And they have added great buildings in Egypt when they occupied for the Greeks, for example. So it's just very unfair to take it from your first look and understanding to things. It's very big to be human. So just let's say it's something else. Recently, we have American archaeologist studies related to building the Great Pyramid in particular. And Mark Lehner took off his life like 50 years academically studying the pyramids. And his studies concluded that it's a human-made. And he described actually with plans and 3D paintings how they were able to achieve that. Even if not 100% of Egyptologists takes his theory or his story of building the pyramids like accurate, but that makes sense to me. Like it was just human based on the most recent, for example, CT scanning of pyramid structure, showing you that humans were trying to climb ascending spiral ramp around the building structure to just build the pyramid step by step from bottom to top, and just making
So it was like an ascending spiral structure
all around the pyramid.
That this Egyptologist believes.
Makes sense actually, following the scan that we have made in the last 5 years at showing us that they were following that spiral ramp. And we still have what we call today the Great Void of the Great Pyramid from inside, showing you that they were ascending. I'm so sorry. They were ascending kind of a ramp or a road all around the structure area just to build the pyramid.
So this Egyptologist for 50 years, you said, was studying the structure and the building of, is it just the Great Pyramids or pyramids in general?
He was studying Giza pyramids in general, but when it comes to the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid, as I mentioned to you in our tour, It's very accurate and it's very great when it comes to its internal design. So he focused on the Great Pyramid and he kept scanning the pyramid. So it's not just studying the stones, the limestone and the granite and the black diorite stone, which is used for some parts of the pyramid from outside, but also he followed scanning, x-raying the body or the structure of the pyramid core to get to know how they were able to do that. And we have actually his published book, The Complete Pyramids, available online today on many platforms, actually, like Amazon, for example. You can read it. It's amazing because that leads you to understand not just humans built Egyptian pyramids, it's even that humans were very great and very well organized, and they were divided into groups, and they have had like managers and supervisors and general manager managing all of this great work along 20 years of building the Great Pyramid. So it's actually giving you an example of accurate management. So it's not only about the structure itself.
Yeah. And that explanation that the pyramids are the result of intense discipline and cooperation and leadership, it's not the sexiest explanation. The book that's going to sell the most copies, I imagine, would be a book about all the alien evidence that there is to support the growth of ancient civilizations. Because that title, it just grabs you. People are fascinated by the unknown. And if we can explain great achievements like this man did, who studied the pyramids, the building of the pyramids for 50 years, no one on the planet, unless someone's been studying the pyramids, like just the building of the pyramids for more than 50 years, no one on the planet besides this guy knows more about the intricacies of how a pyramid is formed. So based on what you're telling me, I would concede to whatever this guy has to say, because he's been waking up every day, drinking a cup of coffee, and then asking himself, how the hell were the pyramids built? And then going to actually get evidence and studying it. So if this guy is talking about the spiral staircases and the spiral formations to haul up the stones, and that also contributed to the accuracy of the pyramids, to me that is just as fascinating or more fascinating, because it shows what humans are actually capable of.
That's true. But here in our Egyptian history, people are buying mostly the viral stories online, not the true academic studies. It's not just about pyramids. Most of the pictures that you are seeing all around online on Facebook and other social media platforms, actually just the fake viral stories, are very famous about Egypt, and tourists comes from all around the world just to ask what exactly happened. Like, we have some statue, if you look at it, you will be converted into a stone, like the Medusa of ancient Greece. We have also some stories related to, like, they have had the earliest helicopter maybe in Abydos temple, and people believe that. Some people believe that they have also Wi-Fi connection because of an offering scene represented at Dendera temple, south of Egypt. So you are just taking the viral fake story because it's much more fun for everyone to believe such stories, and they don't like the academic studies which confirmed by numbers and dates and scans and scientific facts, because it's much more complicated. So they just go to the easy side or the easy way.
Yeah. I have a quote from an engineer about how difficult it is to actually construct the Great Pyramid, and I wanted to read it just so listeners can understand the accuracy of what we're dealing with here with the ancient Egyptians. So this guy's name is Kevin Applegren. He's an engineer, and he writes, quote, "Getting a structure to be generally aligned with true north, or any cardinal point for that matter, is not a huge feat in its own right and quite feasible by modern standards. However, in the context of constructing a pyramid of the proportions we see on the Giza Plateau, using megalithic stone blocks, some weighing in around 70 tons or more, the overall accuracy of the build is not just impressive, it is phenomenal. and would have required extraordinary levels of architectural practice that are unparalleled by today's standards. The cardinal alignment is within 0.05 degrees north-south over a base width equaling 2 rugby fields, and the base on which the pyramid is constructed is flat to a level that could only be achieved in modern day by using laser technology. In fact, the Great Pyramid is still to this day the most precisely oriented building in this world. So when you just look at it, when you look at what the ancient Egyptians were able to do with cooperation, with leverage and ramps, it's just mind-blowing. Like literally it's mind-blowing to conceive of that. But again, when you get people in groups, you can do things like that. And according to the Egyptologist who studied this for 50 years, it's something that certainly is possible. It's not easy, of course, anything but that, but possible nonetheless.
Today, yeah, actually, and mostly during my tours, when I start just to make simple like plan or painting for the pyramid on ground for my tourists and start to tell them about Giza pyramids in particular and following the master plan related to the shining stars in the sky. So it makes you actually believe that ancient Egyptians were very, very advanced when it comes to astronomy, because they were directing pyramids just following the stars in the sky, and that was very accurate to them, mostly much more accurate than any other buildings that we have today in Egypt. So it's actually great. I don't believe in the general master plan story, like telling if you connected all pyramids together on a map, they will shape a human body on sky, and this human body representing Osiris, the god of death. So the pyramids were all built, to follow Osiris.
What's the master plan again? The master plan is if you connect all the pyramids, it will form the god of Osiris.
Some people believe in that, actually. Believe all of Egyptian pyramids that we have discovered so far, the 118, if you painted them like dots on map and started to connecting them together, the final shape of connecting those points on the map will make a human shape on the sky. So ancient Egyptians choosing locations of each pyramid based on that master plan. So it wasn't random selection. I believe in just maybe the main or master plan, which is the Giza pyramids were very accurate, following shining stars, especially the northern shining star in sky, but not the greater master plan, because you can make a different painting as well with just switching the direction of links between each pyramid and the other. But it's actually a very amazing story, and people can buy it much more than the aliens, because if you try it yourself now, trying to connect all pyramids, it will make you a human being body just like swimming in sky.
Yeah, it's clear that astronomy had a huge link to Egyptian culture and the building of the pyramids. And it makes sense because we have so many distractions nowadays at night. How many people are looking for things to study or notice in their natural environment? When you go back 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and more than that, it makes sense that people would be tuning in more to nature and noticing things and energies and alignments, because you couldn't just watch Netflix for 14 hours on your iPhone. You're staring down at a screen all day. If you're bored, what are you going to do besides look up or play around the dirt or some shit like that?
And in ancient times, actually, astronomy started same as any other science that's founded in ancient Egypt. It was because of observing the nature. They were just have, I don't want to say free time to observe the nature, but they were like connected directly to the nature, and life started very simple in ancient Egypt. And they kept learning by time in 10,000 years or maybe more before building the pyramids. So they were connected to sunrise and sunset, to the shining stars in the sky, even to the Nile flood during summer months. So everything happened all around. Egyptians were connected to something. It's happening for a reason for them. And that developed their knowledge like step by step. And after thousands of years, that led them to a very accurate structure of the Great Pyramid. And the second pyramid as well, it's not very accurate compared to the Great, but it's still one of the greatest human structures ever. So actually, observing the nature and learning by time led them to this. If you visit, for example, the British Museum or the Metropolitan Museum, for example, and just check the papyri showrooms, you will see how they were very advanced in astronomy, and they represented everything on papyrus rolls and triangles and square signs, circle, and they were able to calculate everything very accurate. It's actually amazed you how they were very accurate getting such results of mathematical subjects that we are trying to study now, and we don't get the same accurate results. So they were trying, while observing nature, to develop their knowledge, because they believed in one thing. If you are trying to beat the nature, if you are trying to control the nature and build something great keeps your memory, you need to learn. And that actually led to such a revolution in knowledge in ancient Egypt, and that explains you why well-educated people in whole kingdom of our history, while building pyramids, like scribes and engineers and doctors, represented the highest rank of ancient Egypt just after the pharaoh. The pharaoh represented the son of the gods, and the well-educated people who managed the Egyptian kingdoms represented maybe the second highest rank, and they were very glorified and very important because of their knowledge and their understanding of nature.
Do you think that their understanding of nature and making all these advancements was driven by the desire to be remembered and the desire to have a legacy? Because there's a lot of, and not, I don't mean in the vain sense. I don't mean in like, I want people to remember me and listen to this podcast 1,000 years ago. I mean in a greater sense of like, coming from a civilization that believes in the afterlife and is obsessed with death and passing on and keeping things preserved, things like mummification and building massive tombs like the pyramids. Do you think that desire to be remembered and desire to have a place, just a lasting place, drove them to continue to make advancements, to be able to build those things and preserve what they were doing?
It actually connects us again to the same point, which is observing the nature. Egyptians notice that everything around them is renewed every day, starting over sunrise and sunset, Nile flood, and then dry, dead desert, and then Nile flood again with green life. That's why they started to believe that even humans are going to be resurrected, to be rebirthed again, and just to make sure they are going to be resurrected for eternal life according to their understanding, they needed to keep their memory and their own bodies. And that's why actually they just focused on preserving their own afterlife, not their own daily lives. That's why we have just pyramids and tombs and temples related to worshipping gods, but we don't have any house still standing till today. Dates back to ancient era of Egyptian history. So not to be remembered by people who comes after them, but just to keep themselves alive in the after eternal life. So just resurrection made Egyptians try to do great things just to ensure their own second life, their own resurrection. That led us to have such massive structures all around Egypt, from Nubia and south of Nubia in Aswan today till Alexandria. And every different civilization came to Egypt, even if they were non-Egyptians like Greeks and Romans and Persians. They get very influenced with our own understanding of afterlife and resurrection. And they try to do the same like ancient Egyptians, to be mummified and to be kept inside a sarcophagus or a coffin, just to enjoy eternal life. Even Alexander the Great himself, and he was the greatest maybe king in the ancient world ever, when he came to Egypt, he bought our story. He believed in resurrection like Egyptians. However, he wanted people to worship him as a god. But he he believed in resurrection and he wanted to be kept mummified, placed inside golden coffin and buried inside a tomb, same like ancient Egyptians. So it was actually a very logical story for ancient civilizations that resurrection was not just with your soul in afterlife, but with soul and body needed to keep something great around you. So you needed a great structure like a pyramid. You needed golden treasures all around you. You even needed offerings like food and drink to help you in your afterlife to reaching your judgment. So it was just for themselves. They were actually doing this not to be remembered by us, because they never considered that they are going to decline one day and their own great civilization will end, but they just wanted to be remembered by their own gods in afterlife, to be resurrected, to enjoy eternal heaven.
Yeah, that's so it wasn't a legacy thing in terms of like a vain remembrance. It was driven more by nature and preserving the body, preserving the mind and the environment to pass on
Yeah, it's
to the
actually
gods.
started like that, but you can't take it like 100% not related to legacy, because when it came to the new kingdom of our history, and pharaohs started to fight all around the surrounding nations to the east and to the south, pharaohs started to focus on keeping legacy after them, to be remembered. Like Ramses II, for example, most of his structures all around Egypt and outside Egypt, by the way, like Saudi Arabia today, just wanted to keep not just his body with his own tomb and the Valley of the Kings, even his own temples all around Egypt was to keep his legacy, to keep himself remembered and respected by people during his lifetime and after him. So they started to focus only about keeping their own memory only when we started to have surrounding enemies around Egypt and they started to come trying to occupy Egypt. So we started to focus maybe on daily life propaganda and afterlife propaganda as well.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about Ramses II and how he may be overrated as a pharaoh because people see all these statues and they see all these structures and his name is written everywhere. But in reality, he didn't really do that much for Egypt. He just liked putting his name places, and he was alive for a long time and he was able to make all these structures. So his legacy is actually more, his legacy is determined by a reflection of his own ego in building these structures rather than actually moving forward and advancing Egypt.
Yeah, for Ramses II today, I call him the pharaoh propaganda, actually. He was very lucky pharaoh to live for 90 years or more. It was very uncommon in our history. Or more.
90 years.
Like, some people believe that he lived for 95. And that's actually very, very, very uncommon in our history, because most of the great pharaohs that we remember today and very famous in our history, like Tutankhamun or Thutmose or even Ahmose the Mighty, who liberated Egypt, they are all lived for much shorter times than Ramses. But he invested in his long reign. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of wives. That's a lot of wives for Ramses II. A lot of wives and kids.
Yeah, some historians mentioning over 40 wives for him and a long list of 100 son and daughter. I don't think it's very accurate when it comes to Egyptian history and how the royal family counted, actually. Because kings in ancient Egypt, or the pharaohs, were allowed to have many wives. And it was just for the royal family, by the way. If you are a commoner in ancient Egypt, you are just allowed to have one wife with a marriage document. But for pharaohs, were allowed to have just many wives, just for some diplomatic reasons, like Ramses II, for example. He got married to many wives during his lifetime just to make peace treaties with people who were living around Egypt, like Hittites in South Turkey and people of the South. So it was just kind of diplomatic marriages. Hello, Zach?
Yes, can you hear me? I think it cut out for a sec, but I can hear you now. Yeah, you were saying about Ramses II having many wives for diplomatic reasons.
Actually, and it was one of famous traditions during that time of our history. Ramses II actually attitude or trying to keep his legacy and propaganda following war and diplomacy resulted because of heretic era in our history, and people started to get weak we get to know that of some kind of messages from people who rule loyal to Egypt on borders to the east and to the south. They were telling us that we are getting weaker as ancient kingdoms. And Ramses II took the power of Egypt, took the throne of Egypt after all of that, after the heretic era of Akhenaten and his son Tutankhamun, the very old Pharaoh I. So that resulted actually of trying to make Egypt great again. So he followed maybe different ways trying to do that. Getting married to foreign princess, fighting in south and east, even keeping huge structures to make people believe he's great, with very strong body structure, wide chest, and strong muscles. So he was trying maybe to renovate Egypt's image on eyes of the surrounding nations.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny that it's funny that even thousands of years ago, people were still using their own versions of Instagram filters. Like people today, they put filters over their face. It changes their skin tone. They crop out their fat thighs and their saggy chest, and they put up photos on Instagram that are completely different versions of themselves. And back in the day, Egyptian pharaohs were basically Instagramming themselves, putting themselves up as these kind of jacked marauders, when in reality, a lot of them, probably looked, weaker, they're smaller. There were probably some jacked pharaohs, but not a lot of jacked leaders in today's society. So back in the day, they certainly took some liberties with the building of the statues, for sure. And I don't blame them. If I was going to have a statue that was going to be, I thought this was going to be around for thousands of years, or this was supposed to, be a remembrance of me, I would definitely tell people to chisel on some extra abs, turn that 2-pack into a 6-pack.
For Ramses II in particular, he was really not obsessed with keeping himself on a perfect representation only, even just to be mentioned as maybe god of Egypt. That's why he needed to look great, mighty, strong pharaoh. So mostly they were following very perfect representation of the pharaoh and showing him the strong, tall pharaoh with wide chest and strong muscles. And today, when we just look at his statue, we start to keep imagining how he used to look like 3,400 years ago. But when you visit the museum and look at his body, he used to be 176 centimeters high only. So he was normal human, just like us, with a skinny body. And he just wanted to look perfect for a reason, which is, I need to be respected, not just by commoners of Egypt, even by strangers, like people who comes to trade with Egypt and visiting the capital, seeing a huge standing statue in front of the temple from outside, or the pharaoh standing with his strong muscles. So when he comes back to his own country and start telling them how the pharaoh is mighty and tall and strong, so people will have kind of impression of how Egypt is great. But when it comes to reality, they were normal humans, just like us. Some of them were really strong, with very strong muscles, like Imhotep II. And that's actually confirmed by scanning his body and reading some written texts mentioning his lifetime. But other pharaohs weren't really looking like that. Ramses was different.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if any of Ramses' wives from other countries, if the wives just knew him by his statues and how people talked about him as being this jacked pharaoh. And then the wives got to Egypt and they were like, this isn't the same dude I saw in the statue. This is not the dude with the 8-pack and the boulder shoulders. Kind of like how you show up to first dates and someone looks completely different from the picture on their dating profile. That's how Ramses II wives felt about him when they saw him for the first time. They were like, this is the dude. Like, I feel like I got catfished. I got
maybe
statue
for
fished.
Foreign wives of Ramses, like he got married for some diplomatic reasons. It was just great honor to them to come from their own lands to here to Egypt to be queens of Egypt. So actually they would accept him anyway, even if he looks different. But for his greatest wife, for Nefertari, which was mentioned everywhere in Ramses II history, and he loved her very much. Maybe she got to know him in person even before he became the pharaoh of Egypt. I don't want to say they grow up together because we have like 10 or 15 years gap in age between him and her. He's a bit older than her, but she get to know him when he was much younger, and they grow up together in the royal palace. He married her when she was around 15 years old, and he loved her very much, and you can see that mentioned everywhere, like Abu Simbel and her tomb at Valley of Queens and Luxor. So she was really connected to Ramses, and she really loved him since he was young. Even for a pharaoh like Tutankhamun, and scenes and recent CT scans and tests showing us that he was crippled. He suffered from a lame foot and he was very weak structure, but his wife loved him very much, and you can see that from real daily life scenes, showing them in romantic scenes, like she's presenting him flowers or taking care of him or even helping him while hunting. So yeah, they were actually maybe loving their pharaohs not because they are very strong structures, but they were really very caring pharaohs, and they loved and respected their wives very much. So maybe the human side of the great mighty pharaohs in our history very different. Like they are very strong against enemies of Egypt and against the foreigners, but when it comes to family, they are just very kind people and very human and very different. That's why they got loved and respected by their queens, even if they weren't that strong structures.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because a lot of leaders throughout history get characterized as being a certain way by the way they're portrayed in the media, or the way you would portray yourself back in the day through statues and monuments and word of mouth, because you could never, if your duty is to spread your ferocity and strength as a pharaoh to other people and other nations, what's being said about you isn't always going to match your character. So I'm not surprised that pharaohs might have a sort of softer side or a kinder side to them that they didn't actively portray, because they didn't want that to take away from the perceived strength of their leadership.
Mostly they were keeping such personal sides like their own family life and daily life away from being represented, just to keep their own mighty image in people, in commoners' eyes and also in foreign eyes. And when it happened in our history and a pharaoh started just to focus on such family side and like love and caring between him and his family, like Akhenaten, Egypt started to decline. You can see that very clear at Tal al-Amarna scenes, and we have some of them today at the Egyptian Museum. He was showing himself while dining with his queen Nefertiti or kissing his daughters, and he's very nice father, and he's like romantic with his queen. So people around Egypt started to look with different eyes to the mighty pharaoh. They started to say, okay, he's not really focused on protecting his kingdoms. He's focused on family and prayers only. So let's revolt against him. Let's test his power. So actually, yeah, for that reason. Yeah.
So when the pharaohs started to focus on their families, Egypt started to go into decline. That seems so people in Egypt took that as an affront. They saw the pharaohs portraying the love for their family, and they took offense to that in some way, the common people of Egypt.
Yeah, actually foreigners and common Egyptians were the main maybe things that the pharaoh focused on while performing his own activities. Because he needed to be respected by commoners. They are the real powers that support his army, support his reign, extend his lands, and giving him real power and authority. So he needed to focus on them and showing them the perfect image they needed to know about the pharaoh. And commoners actually in ancient Egypt were really smart. So even if they bought a story of a pharaoh during his lifetime that he was mighty and strong, after his death, if they don't really believe in that, they start to react very aggressive against his legacy, against his buildings, removing his names. Yeah, and that happened for Akhenaten. they started to destroy everything he built just after his death, because they don't really believe he was that great pharaoh of ancient great kingdoms of Egypt. Even for Queen Hatshepsut, and she ruled Egypt like a female pharaoh for 22 years. And we see how people started to act very rough for her own buildings and her own memory after her death, because they don't really buy her story during her lifetime 100%. So you need to convince commoner. You just, if you consider them just like weightless, they will represent nothing in your 20 or 30 years of reign, you are mistaken. Because you will die and you will leave your son ruling Egypt after, and you are going to leave him with just very hard impression of commoners, that we can do something against you. We can revolt, we can destroy, we can remove your names. That's why they needed to be respected by commoners and foreigners.
That's fascinating, though, because it seems backwards when I compare it to today's society. And when I think about what makes a leader popular in America, there's no way that someone could become the president of the United States that's not married. Even more than views on abortion or border control, Democrat, Republican, the one thing that presidents always have is a partner. The first lady has been a huge part of presidential history, and presidents have taken photos with families. It's considered a strength and a likability to be pictured with your family and to be taking care of your family and all these things. So when I think about the way that you're describing the dynamic in Egypt with the pharaohs being put down or being revolted against because they were showing their family side or fatherhood, motherhood, taking care of their children, things like that. It's hard for me to imagine that reaction just because things are so different today.
It's actually from our today understanding, I believe that used to be very professional. How you are very caring, nice father, but you are in the same time respected pharaoh by commoners and foreigners. And you don't want to represent every single detail of your daily life in your royal palace with your family, because that will show the human side of you and the human weakness, actually, according to their understanding. That's why they were separating things. We have exceptions in our history, like people were very proud, as I mentioned, Akhenaten was showing love and family. Even his father, Imhotep III, was very proud of his common wife, and he was always mentioning her name. And she used to have equal representation like him, same height of the pharaoh. So even if he made a huge statue of 10 meters high, he would do the same for his wife. Some historians mention that he built for her like a very beautiful palace in Luxor with swimming pool that could be the oldest swimming pool in history of humanity ever. So he loved her and respected her very much, and he was very romantic, emotional to her and to his kids. But when it comes to his single representation, he represents himself like mighty strong pharaoh.
So the pharaohs of Egypt would not have been a fan of our leaders today dancing on talk shows and doing Instagram live while you cook chicken parmesan in your kitchen, riffing on the fight you got into with your boyfriend the other day. The pharaohs would be like, what the hell is going on today? Why are our leaders, why is everyone so obsessed with our personal lives being divulged completely to the public?
It's totally different, from today. But today, because maybe we have a system and we have rules and we have media, and you need maybe to judge your president to choose him or not. That's why he's showing you his human side. But in ancient time, people were fighting and killing each other all around the world. So what only needed to be shown to everyone is just how mighty and how strong you are, and how are you able to run those extended kingdoms from the cataracts south of Nubia today till Mediterranean Sea. You just need to be strong and mighty and control everything in your hand. And that needed no weakness, no emotions, and no romantic side to be shown for everyone. Maybe it could be shown for inside the temple, for the priests, for the family, for the relatives, it's fine. But not for everyone, because that time thousands of years ago, all around the world, not just the Egyptian civilization. The power and the armies were really who ruled. If you have army, you are going to be a king. That's why,
Yeah. I was going to say democracy really is such a new invention because for most of human history, the leaders have been determined by who's the hardest to kill. You would build up your army, you would expand your empire, you would be able to defend your throne. And if someone wanted to take you over, a lot of times they had to kill you or wait for you to die. So that completely flips on its head the dynamics when office positions are determined by popularity contests, because that's essentially what elections are at their most basic level. It's who's the most popular, who's able to get the most votes from the most people. If you're an Egyptian pharaoh, you're not worried about getting votes. You're worried about someone slitting your throat in the middle of the night, or hundreds of commoners and slaves getting together and revolting and forming an army to go against your army. So it does, now that I'm thinking about it, it does make sense that you would want to have such this hard, scary, angry appearance, because it's easier to feel like you can conquer someone that shows that they have a human side, a vulnerable side. And when you're showing your family, when you're showing the things that you hold the most dear to you, you are revealing exactly what your weak spots are and how people can defeat you in some ways. That's why it's so risky to share things on social media. If you share the things that you care about the most, those are also points where people can attack you. And in my opinion, people share way too much nowadays, and they don't think about the opposing side of sharing your entire life, which is now people have all this information about you and you never know what's going to come back to bite you. So having the constant threat of violence and death and defeat as a pharaoh seems like it would certainly change the way that you portray yourself. You would want to be this strong, confident, jacked, just fucking like all around exceptionally fierce dude so that people did not try to fuck with you. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, of course. Yes. Did you get all of that?
I just get off the headphones and put my phone on charge. So actually,
okay, perfect.
In ancient Egypt, that used to be different. Egyptian pharaohs, when they came to the power, they were respected because they are representing gods on earth, and that kind of representation needed to be perfect, strong, and mighty, and needed to be kept away from weakness. And today, people are sharing everything in social media. This is really annoying actually, because when you let everyone know everything about you, that will harm you one day. So just keeping some privacy, and that's what was happening in ancient Egypt, having like their own families, like very private and not revealed to everyone, just to keep themselves respected and strong and mighty.
Yeah, in my opinion, people don't think about that enough today. And I've been guilty of this too, where you just throw everything out there. You're not deciding carefully what you want to share about your life, what you don't want to share, putting your family out there, your girlfriend out there, boyfriend out there, the things that are personal, showing where you live. It seems like there's all these vulnerabilities that are being vomited all over social media today, and just everything is it's not in a carefully curated source of information, which is why it feels so good to come across good information on social media. Like if you find a good article on Twitter, or you find a high value account on Instagram, because everything is just so shitty, or not everything, but a lot of things are just basically like this unintellectual vomit across a page that has no sort of filter. It's just people think everything is worth sharing.
I do that myself, but I believe that for my own stuff, it's nice to share them. Not my personal life, of course, but caring of animals and birds and nature in general. I believe it's very worthy to share instead of sharing your own personal life.
Yeah, but your account does seem very carefully curated, because you're at Aly of Egypt and you also have a Discover Egypt account where you show the places that you visited, you show the tours that you give. So when I look at your profile, it doesn't seem like vomit. It seems like these beautiful pictures of places that you help tourists learn about and you help people gain
Yeah,
knowledge of.
actually, I believe today it's not really everyone able to show himself like influencer, showing nothing at all, but just making live videos every day of normal activities of life
Mm.
and filling social media profiles with such things. I just focus maybe to promote Egypt as destination and to promote my business, of course. So yeah,
Hello?
I hear you, Zach.
Can you hear me? Check, 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 check.
Yeah, I hear you well.
Yeah, it's you cut out for a bit, but I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back. I'm just gonna take
Yeah,
a
we
2 minute
can make a
break.
break and I will charge my phone a little.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I'll see you in a sec.
Yeah.
You're back? Good to go? Okay. I wanted to get into ancient Egyptian sexuality because I was reading a little bit about it, and I actually read something about Egyptians having their own form of porn on erotic papyrus. There have been papyrus drawings found that show pornographic images. How did Egyptians view sexuality? What was when you think about ancient Egyptians doing it essentially, or just like the being sexual beings? How do we know what they thought about it? Like what's their what did they think about sexuality in
Actually,
general?
the ancient Egyptians believed creation of everything of a man and woman, female and male. That's actually the start of the creation to ancient Egyptians. God Atom, the creative god of everything, according to ancients, created couple, male and female. It was wind and moisture, and then they have had gap and not, and maybe this is what you mean exactly. The representation of the couple together on the papyrus roll. They are representing the earth and the sky actually in ancient Egypt, like male and female after sex. But when it comes to representations of sexuality in ancient Egypt, that wasn't really focused. They meant fertility. And that's why actually the god of fertility in ancient Egypt, Amun-Mine, represented many times upon the walls of Egyptian temples. But if you mean the pornography representation, we have one of them, yeah. It dates back maybe mostly after the death of Queen Hatshepsut at Deir al-Bahari in Luxor, showing her in a sexual pose with a man meant to be Senmut, her architect, and that could be the earliest pornography seen ever in history of humanity. We are talking about 3,500 years ago. But just to focus on this, on ancient Egypt, they don't. Most of the scenes that represented in ancient times mostly meant day and night, earth and sky, even fertility, like the standing naked man with erected organ, that meant to be the god of fertility in ancient Egypt, and the fertility meant eternal life and resurrection to ancient Egyptians. So that used to be a bit special according to what I have studied, and that's very sensitive actually to talk about in Egypt. But yeah.
Really, the sexuality of ancient Egyptians is sensitive to talk about in Egypt, or just the sexuality in general?
Sexuality in ancient Egypt as well. You know, because of traditions and religion today. So things like that mostly kept private. Like you can read about it, but you can't really discuss with your tourists during tours, because some people will take some words while you're describing the scene or something with misunderstanding. And that happened to me before actually, while giving a description at Luxor Temple for a group of tourists, and I felt shy actually to tell them about details. But after the tour, they came to me asking me about that, and they asked me why I skipped some parts of description, and it's fine to tell them about that. I told them I'm just following the academic descriptions that I have studied.